I'm Jenny Fern and welcome to my library. I'm a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. I know I just said let's talk about books, but what I really mean is let's talk about book tracking apps and websites. So at the beginning of my reading year, I decided I wanted to use a different book tracking app this year rather than Goodreads. Goodreads just doesn't have like a ton of flexibility. It's also owned by Amazon. It's very hard to get rid of Amazon from your reading habits. I know it is for me. I just got a Kindle for Christmas and I get a lot of Kindle books from the library. I totally understand that it's really hard to get Amazon outside of your reading, but I didn't want to willingly be partaking in Goodreads anymore. I started using Goodreads in 2017. I was still in college, but I was almost graduated. And before that, I was just writing things down in a notebook. The conclusion that I've come to now is I don't want to use an app. I don't want to be using some other system that doesn't fit my needs exactly. I can feel these apps manipulating the way that I read in ways that I'm uncomfortable with. So I want to talk to you about the apps that I've looked at, and then again, my ultimate decision to not use any this year and see how that goes. So I had put together some notes in this alternatives to Goodreads document. And the 4 apps that I was vetting, apps or websites, were the StoryGraph, Fable, LibraryThing, and BookWyrm. I'll just go down the list and talk through what happened and all of that. So the StoryGraph, signing up was easy. I didn't have to download an app. But unfortunately, when I did go to download the app and sign in, I don't know what went wrong, but I could never sign in. Like, some error was happening. Transferring books from Goodreads was super easy. You just download the CSV from Goodreads and upload it to the StoryGraph. So I thought the tags for what the book is like, there were moods and pace tags. I thought that was helpful, but the way that I read, I don't look up books before I read them. If I hear about a book and I jot it down, or I buy a book from the thrift store or something, I'm not gonna look it up. I just don't look books up. It's helpful for other people for sure, but not really for me. The stats were cool. I thought that was fun, but I did have a hard time finding where things are. So for me, the most important things are giving a rating, adding the dates that I read the book. I think this is much more of a like, as you start reading something, you say you started reading it, and then like you can cruise along in that way, but I had a hard time. I also thought the star rating was a little bit clunkier than Fable. So Fable, I had to download an app. I could not use a browser. Transferring books from Goodreads entailed just signing into Goodreads, so it was super easy. The user interface made me extremely uncomfortable, and I have no idea why. It looks nice, but I have in my notes, I found it claustrophobic. And I have to be honest, every time I had to add a book, which at the beginning of the year, I was reading a book every single day, so it became like a daily thing, and I really, really didn't like it. I couldn't figure out how to get any additional detail on the stats that were provided to me. It's not like I could like click it and it would give me more information about like what the books were that made up the stats. After I added my first 2 books, it felt like it was different every time I tried to do something. I like went about it a different way. And then I noted Something about this app is very unsettling and makes me irrationally upset, but I was able to give it a partial star rating, which was nice. Clearly, I hated the experience of using this app, and this is genuinely part of the reason why I decided not to go with anything. And I know that Fable is promoted a lot on BookTube, and I can understand why. It seems fine, it seems functional and everything, but something about it did not work with me and my brain. I also tried out LibraryThing, which I've heard other people using before, especially when they want to catalog their personal library. It is extremely dated looking. If you think Goodreads is dated, LibraryThing is also very dated. For transferring books, I did upload my CSV as well. There were a lot of uploading options, and it's not just Goodreads. You could do a whole bunch of different options, I believe. It's a website. I'm not sure if there's an app. I used the website. I found that it was difficult to add books on the website itself. It didn't seem super intuitive to me. And the dates read, you have to like click in and go extra in to add in the dates. So overall, it was a little clunky and has like a ton of options for you, especially if you want to catalog your own personal library. That seems like what it's really good at. The one that I had never heard of before, but I actually enjoyed the most was BookWyrm. I didn't need to download an app. The website looked a little dated looking. It looked kind of like old Facebook, like a little bit. So it kind of reminded me of MySpace, even though it really looked like old Facebook. So for transferring books from Goodreads, I uploaded a CSV and it worked okay. I also found it hard to add books to currently reading. For example, you have to say that you started reading it instead of saying that you were currently reading it. That kind of stuff annoys me, to be honest. Initial reviewing was simple and easy. They offer half stars, but I did really enjoy that there was a quote option when you review, so you could add in like a favorite quote if you wanted to do that, which is more in line with what I like to do. I thought it was the least frustrating one. As for all of the like social media aspects, I just don't want to say anything about that because I don't use Goodreads very socially. That was my experience. If I were to recommend one, I'd probably recommend BookWyrm, but also it was just the one that made the most sense to my brain. So now I guess into the discussion of why I decided to not go with any app and how I plan to track my reading this year. I am really thinking a lot more about being a human and doing things that make me feel more in touch with humanity. And I was finding using these various apps and websites, like my humanity was not being fully honored or recognized. And that seems like a crazy thing to say. I get it, but there's just really simple things that you can do in the real life and in your brain that you can't do in these apps. And I have a few specific examples about how these apps or websites can change your behavior in ways that you don't really want. One of the big ones that I think has been noted by many people is the star ratings. Star ratings are useful to collect data and provide like numerical data to display something easy to digest for other people. But what does it do for me? I don't know. I don't know what it does for me. When I read a book, if I loved the book for various reasons or I loved the experience reading that book, I don't have to then transmute that feeling, those emotions, the appreciation of writing craft, and I don't have to then turn that into a numerical value. This is what I mean by retaining some of my humanity. I don't need to do that for anything or for anybody. I think I'm also done with star ratings. It changes the way that I think about books, where I'm like, okay, well, that was a 4-star. Maybe I loved reading that book at the same time, but then it's a 4-star. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making myself very clear, but there are these like squishy elements to reading that I think we lose when we decide to use these apps. The other incredibly important thing to me, you can't start the year on an arbitrary day, which boggles my mind. I should be able to start a project or a new year or anything. I should be able to do that. I'm in control of myself, you know? And I think that this is a common thing that people do, that they start their reading year, they start a goal to read more at an arbitrary time in the year with these like reading goals. You can't even say, okay, within this quarter, I want to read this many books. Like, why do we not have this flexibility for ourselves? It should be doable. I start my reading year December 25th. And so I track all these books. If I want to track them the day that I read them, they count for last year. They don't count for the new year. And that's extremely frustrating to me because I know what my year is and I can't tell the system what my year is. So it's always very frustrating to me when a system cannot reflect the reality that I have. And it's also like not aligned with how people do things. Just imagine you're like, I really want to get into reading. I've been inspired by somebody. That could happen at any time. That could happen in August. And you're like, wow, I really want to read a bunch of books. Or like every month you want to read like 10 books and you want to track it every month. So anyway, that was weird and frustrating for me that that's not available on other apps. Even though I knew it was useful for other people to see what the mood, what the pacing of a book was, it again felt very analytical when I'm done reading a book to be like, was this book a happy book? And was this book fast-paced? Like, having to boil the experience of reading the book down to base elements so that it helps other people, instead of like going into the nuance of why. Like, if I say a book is slow-paced, but like I want to explain why it's worth reading and why that slow pace is actually beautiful for the book, you know? There's no space for it there because all it's trying to collect is data and that's just a little uncomfortable and weird for me right now. Key to affecting my reading in a very significant way is these apps and websites, they focus on a book, a complete book that has been published, a physical object or an object that you buy. They're focusing on that as the only thing that you can track having read. And this is important to me because I want to read more short stories. And maybe I want to read a novella in a book, but I don't want to read the other novellas in that book. So when I was doing the 7 books in 7 days at the beginning of the year, I read 2 of Tolstoy's novellas, but I didn't read the 3rd in that book. And so does it count? I have to like find some other published work, some other book that encapsulates that thing that I read. But like, was it that translation? I don't know. And then say I read a play, a specific play in a collection of plays. Does that count as having read something? If it's only a piece of a book, if I read a few short stories and I'm not going to read the rest of the book, does it not count as reading? You get what I'm saying? Like, we have these arbitrary, imposed constraints on ourselves as what counts as the year, what counts as reading. And I'm sick of it. I don't want to do it anymore. My new system is my notebook. I'm sure I'm gonna forget things that I've read. I will not be able to capture everything if I don't stay on top of it. But that's how it is with everything. I'm feeling so much more freed. Not having to ascribe a numerical value to these books. Not having to be, the moment I finish a book, log in and be like, oh, I finished it on today, so it'll count for my goal. I was able to write down short stories that I read from literary journals. I was able to say that I read portions of books. Let me just show you how much this has made me feel freer. I was able to read part of that big book up there. This one, that I'm not gonna go pick down because it's huge. I was able to read part of that book. I was able to read part of this book, part of this book, and part of this book. They're complete stories. I finished a thing, and I was able to not force myself to read the whole book to have it count. I could just read the complete story. I read 3 short stories from a collection of short stories, and it is so much more freeing. I'm trying to convince you all because I think it's good for you. I'm trying to let myself be a human instead of forcing myself to provide data for like a database or a system. I don't need to do that. I can read books, I can read stories, I can read works, and then I can tell you about them, like person to person, and we can both be humans together. That's what I'm going for this year. Sorry if this is a little hippy-dippy, just regaining our humanity anytime that we can. It just seems really important. No apps, no star ratings, reading partial books, reading short stories. I'm like, I can read fan fiction and I can have it count for something. I was so obsessed with having something count, even though I knew that that meant nothing, because I was logging it into this system that didn't reflect real life in any meaningful way. I was changing the way that I lived. That's just not gonna cut it for me anymore. I feel like I have to make a crazy thumbnail of, like, I've had it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts on this. I did not think this was how this was gonna go. I really thought I was just gonna pick another app and move forward with it, and I just felt so uncomfortable. Part of it was like using something different, but then I was really thinking critically about the actions that I was doing, and I was like, this is stupid. And I started getting really angry and frustrated. If you enjoyed this, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think would also enjoy it. Consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back again soon.